Hello, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Focus Friday here on July the 28th. Two topics for today. The first one is I want to take a really deep dive into tar spot and really have a feeling for what should we do this year. Getting lots of questions out there. And then secondly, I want to talk about Sclerotinia white mold and wondering, is that going to be a big challenge for this year? I think it might. But let's jump into tar spot first, and we think about what do we know about tar spot? Well, we know that 2 years ago it was a problem. We had moisture in July and in August, and we had dead plants long before we should have in September and early October, and it affected yield in a negative way for a lot of folks. Kind of caught us off guard, really. So we all got things ready, and we're ready for a challenge again in 22. And well, weather was a little different in 22, a little drier all the way really until mid-August. And we just didn't see the tar spot come in that early, and when it did come in late enough, didn't really seem to affect yield in a lot of fields. So now we got 23. We've been wet in most of the state since July the 12th. We've had some cooler evenings. We've had 8 hours of leaf wetness. And now we're sitting here a couple weeks after the 12th of July and saying, there's a good chance if we're going to find it, now is a pretty good time to start scouting in the better part of the state of Michigan, because we do have confirmations in southeast Monroe County. There are confirmations in Ontario, Canada, as well as in northwest Indiana. So it is all around us. But at the end of the day, it still always comes back to the disease triangle. And so you think, for tar spot, do we have inoculum in the environment? Yeah, most of our fields have some level of inoculum in the soils, and if not, it certainly can blow in from the neighbors. Corn is a susceptible host. That's the second leg of the triangle. Some are certainly more susceptible than others. We have some good varieties out there with tolerances, but nobody's fully resistant. And the third leg of that triangle is always the environment. And we are certainly in a conducive environment for tar spot right now. So will it develop? Certainly I would be on the betting side of yes. And the question is it going to be as bad as it was in 21? And the real answer for that is it depends on what the continued forecast is. But if we continue in a weather pattern like we're in right now, certainly the odds are in favor of more of a challenge with tar spot this year than we had last year, and possibly something like we saw 2 years ago. So the real question is, what do I do? And I'm getting all kinds of questions. Do I spray? If I spray, when do I spray a fungicide? And I think we got to put ourselves into one of three categories to best make up our mind on if and when we're going to spray. And I think the first thought is, we have folks that just aren't going to, or just really can't because of equipment or other reasons, can't spray. And unfortunately, those folks are certainly their success can be dependent upon the success of the hybrid that they selected and its natural tolerances. And that'll get you a long ways, but again, nothing is fully resistant. We have a lot of folks that say, you know what, I'm willing to spray. I can spray. I really only want to spray once, though. And so if I'm only going to spray once, when do I time it? And so I think there's two things we think about for that single application, folks. And that is, one, historically, the best time to apply a fungicide late has been the R1 stage. So that is from that first silk to brown silk, that whole green silk stage, which a lot of our corn is in right now. And so a lot of good research over the years behind with or without tar spot. A good reason to consider putting a fungicide on corn at R1. The other part of that is, if I'm only going to spray once, but I really want to focus on tar spot as the reason that I'm spraying, then I'm probably going to keep my powder dry, and I'm going to probably wait until we either find it through our own scouting, or we realize all of our neighbors are starting to find it, and then hitting that application. Because as we know, most of the fungicide companies out there are promoting 21 to 28 days of protection, not at least on the good fungicides out there. And with that, we want to extend that as long as we can to get the greatest amount of protection we can. So the third group of us are out there for maximizing yield and have the ability and the interest in spraying possibly multiple times. And for those folks, it's really important to get this first application on, hear it at R1, and then continue to scout and watch. And if things do really brew up and we start to get to the end of that protection cycle, to consider one additional application, possibly to get us closer to that black layer or 32% moisture in the corn, because obviously we're going to be putting more yield into that kernel every day that we can keep that corn plant alive. A couple other questions I'm getting from folks specifically on this is, what if I just have some poor yielding fields, 150 bushel yield environments? Can I really afford to put a fungicide on those fields? And my answer to that is let's reverse engineer that question a little bit. If a fungicide application with the cost of corn and application, everything maybe costs us the equivalent of 7, 8, 9 bushels of corn, depending on your economics there. That means my 150, if I get 140 bushels out of that field, I've broken even. And we all know from 2 years ago, some folks would have been happy with 140 bushel on any field that was hit with tar spot. So it's not so much of only on the good fields, but what fields can we afford to not protect? And I think we need to do everything we can out there on most of our fields if we decide to spray a fungicide out there. The second question I get a lot is, as long as I'm going across the field, should I throw anything else in the tank with it? Let it share the ride out there. And that answer is the same as it always has been. If we've got a level of insects out there, whether it be Japanese beetles or corn rootworm beetles, and we're feeding on silks and we're getting or worried about them getting to a point where they're feeding those silks down to less than 1/4 of an inch, then absolutely, want to throw an insecticide in, and then always an opportunity to throw in a little bit of fertilizer, some micropacks, add some boron, some fulvic acid, things like that. But always remember, the label is the law. So we're always reading and following the label instructions, and only apply based upon the label of each and every one of those products that you might allow to share the ride on that fungicide application. The third question I'm getting is, won't a fungicide just make my corn wetter and delay my harvest? My answer for that is yes, hopefully, because the alternative to that is die down. And there's a difference between corn drying down and dying down. And if I want to maximize my yield potential, I need it to dry down naturally and not die due to some other things. So I'm hoping that this stays alive absolutely as long as it can, to put as much yield in every one of those kernels as possible. So in conclusion on the tar spot topic here, I want to make sure we're thinking about starting scouting today, because we're in that 2 to 3 weeks after the 12th of July that we started to see that high moisture show up. And so it's certainly time. Where do we scout? I recommend we start in the lower part of that canopy right now, because most of the tar spot we're going to see is going to be homegrown tar spot from those fields. Now, granted, give it a couple weeks and the tar spot's flying around the countryside, and those we'll start to see it up in the upper part of the canopy. But right now it should be on the lower part. And be ready to spray. Make sure we're using fungicides with multiple modes of action, and trying to get protection out there as long as we can, and then watching that forecast and continuing to scout to see what comes through. So lots of things to think about on tar spot right now, but shifting gears, I want to also talk about soybeans and white mold. We haven't seen a lot of white mold in the last few years, but boy, every morning I go out and get my boots wet walking across the yards and feeling the environment and saying, this is the type of year that we often see an explosion of white mold. And so we all know the fields that we have that tend to be a little bit more problematic in its fields, and that's because we go back to that disease triangle again. We have susceptible hosts, which is soybeans, some more so than others. We know those fields that have the inoculum out there in those soils because we've had problems in the past, and we've got the environment that is conducive to white mold. So, of course, white mold lives on the soil surface there. It enters through the flowers as those spores get up into the air under that canopy there. And so, if we think we've got a high-risk field there, it is time to, get the fungicides out there. Make sure you get a fungicide that's specifically designed for white mold. Check the label. Check the MSU trials for find out what the best ones out there are for white mold. And then, spraying sooner rather than later to manage through that. And of course, once we get white mold out there, unfortunately, not a lot of great rescue treatments. We need to think about future years with varietal selection for varieties that are more tolerant to white mold, maybe widening out those row widths, maybe decreasing that population to allow more air in that canopy. And then, there's a multitude of chemical solutions out there for white mold. And anytime you want to talk about that, just give me a call. I'll be happy to walk through those different options with you. So lots of exciting things going on right now. In general, though, with this rain, the crop is looking pretty good. And that is exciting as we have lots of moisture here at pollination time and hopefully setting ourselves up for some good yields as long as we can protect against the things that are working against us here. So as always, it's Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Focus Friday. Hope you're having a great week. We'll talk to you next week.